Hi, my name's Abi Harris, and today we're going to be focusing on using data. I'm an assistant head at the Tiffin Girls School in Kingston, and one of my responsibilities is the data manager at the school. I'm going to be doing this session with Kat Sousa, who's our PCM, and she works with our trainee students and also NQTs. So the main thing that we're going to be looking at is how we know how our students are learning using data that we can collect. But the main thing for you is once we've got that data, done our analysis, what are we then going to do about it? So to start with, I would like you to complete task A. So in a moment, you need to pause the presentation. Task A is a number definition, so you have 7 different words that you come across frequently in data analysis, and I'd like you to try and write your own definitions or define them in discussion with each other. But I've also given you a small clue if you are unsure of what they mean. So pause me now and do task A. Thank you. So, I want to start by sharing some of the reporting requirements of schools. So, the Department for Education says that every student in every key stage should have one written report by the end of the summer term. What that can mean is either pupils get a really big report at the end of the year or they split it by terms. So we currently do that at our school. The diagram on this slide shows you the content that needs to be covered. So for secondary school children, we need to make sure their general progress here, achievements, their development, their attainment as well, their attendance, and also any exam results are recorded. The key thing is that we need to make sure we send home attendance, so percentage attendance and any what we call authorised absences or unauthorised ones, and then there needs to be a report of the exam results that students get. Now, this is only required for external exam results, but as you will see in a moment, at Tiffin Girls, we also report on internal exam results as well. So these are the things that we do to make sure we're meeting those reporting requirements. So what we send out per term per year group is a report. So it says 3 reports there. That's really only for the sixth form because lower down the school they get 2 reports and a parents' evening as well. The content of the reports includes their attendance summary, the assessment points of that term. So, for year 7 to 9, we have bands, mastery on track, working towards and cause of concern. So, in each subject, they get a different band. At GCSE, so year 10 and 11, they get a grade, so a 9 to 1 grade, and at A level, they get a letter grade. And then for each assessment point in terms of the grading, they also have a number of TLAs. Those are different learning attributes. So we assess learning at home, learning in lessons, and organisational skills. Then in terms of written reports, for year 7 to 10 we have something called a tutor report. It is a report that's not academic, it's on students' wider participation in the school. So it might be leadership positions that they hold, or it might be extracurricular they're involved in, or things about their general character in the tutor group. For year 12, they have their UCAS reports for their references that they will get in year 13 to apply for university. So they're done at the end of year 12. And then for year 11 and 13, they have their exam results. So that's how we meet the reporting requirements. And as you can see, they're probably over what is needed, but we feel because we have that data coming into school, we can report on those things. We have made a lot of changes. I've been at the school for 12 years, and when I first started, we as teachers had to write an individual report per pupil per year group in the summer term, and actually what we do now is we give parents the same information, but we just do it in a smarter way. So that's really good in terms of making sure the data fits the purpose that needs to at the moment. And complete task B, I have also provided a list of key acronyms that are on the data for you, because we use things like SEN. That's pretty standard, but we have something called the LSG group, which is literacy support group, PP, pupil premium, AP, CFC, WT, that sort of thing. So all of those phrases are outlined for you, and you need to now have a go at doing task B, and analysing that data and thinking about what it shows you and what you would do about it.
So having analysed your data, similar to the task that you've just completed, these are some potential strategies that you might wish to put in place for your classes, or that you may be asked to put in place by a head of department or by SLT.
So we're going to take a little look now at how you can collect and use data in your day-to-day teaching, because that's probably what's going to apply the most to you in your ECT years. So let's have a look at that now. My best advice for all the people that I mentor and all the new teachers that I speak to is to just set up a personal database in September with all your classes. Some people do this in a mark book, but most people now prefer to do this electronically. And you can export this really easily from Sims or whichever alternative platform your school are using. You just take the class list that is assigned to you, and then you can add certain columns for which bits of information you want to add for each of those students. So you will add SEN information, pupil premium information, ethnic groups, if they're on some sort of help reading group or something to help accelerate their progress in certain areas. Any information like that you think is going to be useful. And particularly pay close attention to any groups that are on your school development plan. Groups that your school have identified as having gaps in progress or attainment. with the other demographics. So that might be an important one to add. Once you add all that information, you export it onto an Excel sheet. I'll show you mine in a second so you can have a look at how it might look. And I would highly recommend that you open this daily. In the morning when you come in and you open up your email and your folder with all your lessons for the day or whatever else is open on your desktop permanently, I would also recommend having your database open for you. Obviously make sure that that's not something that you then present to the students accidentally, because it's highly confidential. The reason for that is that it prompts you to keep recording small bits of information as and when, live information, live data, live marking, and that is the most useful type of data that you will collect there. I've little in-class assignments that I might do if they've self-assessed something or peer assessed it. If I've obviously marked a piece of work, then I'll record the marks they get on there as well. And I will, if it's a piece of work that's not really markable with a mark, so let's say, for example, it's a presentation they've delivered or a project that they've done, then I'll usually RAG rate those. So on my database, show you, I will, if it's something that was just something that I observed them do, or it was a write-up that's not something that I can assign marks to, then I'll just RAG rate it as and when it happens, or as and when I mark it. This could have been a homework that they do. I could get them to read out their marks, or if they're particularly shy, I could just take them in. They've self-assessed, let's say. I take the marks in and I just quickly record it, potentially in the lesson while they're getting on with something, or afterwards. What I would say is, once you've got this database up and running and you start to use it more and more, you'll be collecting data that can help you to track skills and specific achievement points throughout the year. Some people use it with their learning objectives, so they might have like specific categories of learning objectives at the top here rather than pieces of work. I tend not to do that. I tend to have titles of things that summarize what the work was about, because that does follow the topics that we do in our schemes of work. But different subjects do this differently. You could also, if you're a subject that repeatedly assesses certain skills, like in MFL, for example, you can use this to track skills. So only have those sorts of assessments, an oral, a written, a writing, a reading task, etc. So you can then keep visiting and see the progress over time. The other thing that I would highly recommend here is to not wait until data drops to complete this. If it's not something that you're going to be doing continuously throughout the year, then it's probably not a system that's going to work for you. If it's just an extra thing that you have to then add to, that's not how it's intended. What it's intended to do, it's intended to help you to track progress, to see as and when things are arising with your students that might be a problem, patterns in their behavior that might be unusual, and also to help you to target your teaching. If you wait until a data drop to add in the data into your database, that they will be for learning objectives that you taught a couple of months ago. By that point, it's too late to have any sort of impact on those students and help them with that particular teaching point. So it only really works if it's used continuously throughout the year, and that you keep looking at it and kind of picking up potential problems that might be arising. Conditional formatting, my absolute favorite thing. Yes, there's a button on Excel, there's a slightly different button on Google Sheets. So I prefer the Excel one, but Google does do it. It's just not as user-friendly. That basically just you highlight your column and it will just RAG rate it for you, comparing the numbers to each other. So yeah, you can just Google how to conditionally format. I would have demonstrated it to you if we had been in person, but it's not as easy when I'm recording things. But yes, I highly recommend it. And it helps you because it gives you sort of overview straight away. Like I can see this student over here, student D, is struggling on almost every single assignment. She had one assignment here that actually went really well. So I can say to her, you know what, actually with this required practical and this required practical, these two, they seem to be okay. They're not, you know, they're not ones that you were struggling with. But almost every time she's given me practice questions, there have been some issues with those. She's performed lower than her classmates, significantly lower. With another student, let's take this one over here, student G, I can now analyze this and I can say, you know what, you have some issues with these two topics, these two assignments, potentially these topics. In this topic, in the first few topics we were doing, you were performing quite well. When it came to neurons, the nervous system, synapses, which is also part of that topic, I can see that you've dropped significantly. So I can have those learning conversations with the students. I can also bring this up during parents' evening. Again, not presenting it, but I can use it and I can use it to help inform the parents of specific targets that they should be helping their children to focus on in the run up to exams, in revision for their own personal learning. Again, if you're tracking skills because it suits your particular subject, you can talk about specific skills that might need to be a focus and other things that they can just kind of leave to one side because they've got it and they've got it in the bag and they're doing really well with it. So it helps to give you very targeted instruction to students, to have targeted conversations about how they should focus their revision and to have those conversations with parents. I would also recommend that you share the students' specific data with them at key points throughout the year. You know, maybe having a conversation with them at some point where you show them just their own data and you can get them to set their own targets for the next few lessons. You can remind them, by the way, the last time we did an assignment like this, you didn't do too well on this part of it, this particular skill was lacking, or this topic was weaker for you. So then they can focus within a lesson where they have options of different skills that they can work on. They can focus on that particular thing. They can also personalize their own revision. They can have a personalized revision list as a result of you having collected this data for them, or they can even self-differentiate the learning objectives. They can choose specific learning objectives in a revision lesson or in a lesson where you're, for example, in science we do required practical write-ups. Within that write-up, there'll be certain sections that they have to complete, certain competencies that they have to display. If I could say to a student, by the way, this particular competency seems to be your downfall each time, then they can just focus on that one within the next few practicals that we do, and they can practice that one. They can choose which thing best applies to them. So that is how I set up my database at the start of the year, how I collect data throughout the year, and then how I can then use that data to have useful and informative conversations with students and their parents to help students to self-differentiate or to choose and personalize the learning objectives for specific lessons, and how I can then use this information to more accurately report and plan accordingly for the needs of those students. If I see there's a particular assignment here where loads of my students did really poorly, then that will make me reevaluate how I taught that particular topic, that particular lesson, or maybe if that assignment was pitched incorrectly. So that helps me to self-reflect as well on my teaching of particular things. And the top row over here, by the way, just as a bit of extra information, I'll just put the maximum mark, so then I know that they're constantly being assessed against those. There are some situations where I didn't do that, and then all it was doing was formatting students against each other, which is fine for certain assignments, but it wasn't helping me to see if they were all looking kind of greenish because they all did equally badly. So that's one of the potential problems with not adding in the total at the top, so that every other number is compared against that. Now, how might I use this information? Well, first of all, registration group, particularly important to have. Obviously, these are made up registration groups, but I can straight away, if I know that there's a student that's just suddenly slipped, or if I'm having certain issues with a particular student, behavior problems, lack of homework, that kind of stuff, then I've got all that. I don't need to waste time looking up their information. I can just quickly fire off an email to the tutor and say, by the way, this is what's happened and this is what I've done about it. And, I'd like your support, or I might come into your tutor group tomorrow morning just to speak to this person. These columns, what you choose to put here is up to you, but I would definitely highly recommend SEN information and any things that have been put in place for those students. So for example, I have one student, I think it was further down here, that needs 25% extra time when they're sitting exams. Okay, so I need to make those adaptations in my lesson when they're sitting tests in class, so I can also do that for them. And if I don't have this information here, it's very easy to forget. We've got multiple classes and multiple students, all with different needs. So that's why I like this. And then just little prompts for me. Oh, this person's hearing impaired, seat at the front. So just when I'm organizing my seating plan, then I can just keep referring to that. If I'm moving people around, then I can keep kind of checking because I've got it open if there's something that I need to take into consideration. Medical conditions. Again, optional. I have this for a couple of reasons. Number one, because a lot of those medical conditions are allergies, and we work a lot with certain foods in my subject, so I need to just bear that in mind. Some other people might need, if it's a medical condition that requires them to be able to come and go, like leave the room because they might have panic attacks and things like that, again, might be something that you want to just make a note of. First language and ethnicity, again, completely optional. However, in our context, we have a very multicultural school, and as a result, there are certain cultural things that we might need to take into consideration when we are teaching certain topics, and certain cultural capital that students can bring to the classroom when we're teaching certain things. So sometimes it can be useful for that. Other times it can be useful when you're analysing your data later on. You can filter for particular ethnic groups. If you know that your school has gaps with particular ethnic groups they want to focus on and help them to narrow those gaps. Same with pupil premium, same with EAL, same with SEN. You can filter for those particular groups, so you can see how those students are faring against the rest of the class, and if maybe you need to put some certain interventions, personal class interventions in place, or maybe seek further guidance from your SENCO or from, let's say, if it's an EAL issue, if you have like a team within your school that might be working with EAL students or helping to, accelerate reading ages or things like that, you might want to seek advice from those individuals. Target grades. Target grades extremely important. Helps you to gauge. For example, this student does seem to be underachieving. Student F does seem to be underachieving, or let's say underachieving in some assignments compared to her classmates. Middle of the class for other assignments. However, she's on a target grade, so not one that I need to particularly worry about. Although I will want to push her a little bit further and see how much she can improve those grades, and particularly with topics where I know that there's particular questions that I know that she could have done better on, then I can still use this to focus my attention. But I can also, when I'm explaining this data to a head of department or SLT, I can justify it if I've got my target grade against the current grade and they're on par. So there's a lot of information that can be gained from racking up this data throughout the year. I wouldn't tell you to rush and to try and get loads and loads of data together. It starts off slow in September, but as and when you start collecting in homeworks, doing self or peer assessment in class, anything that you feel like that could be useful. Any particular piece of work that represents a small topic that you've taught, all of those things can be extremely useful to log on a database and then build it up throughout the year so you can start to see particular patterns as and when they emerge.
Okay, so we're going to think about GCSE now, and these are some of the key changes that have occurred in the last 5 years. So at GCSE level, all the curriculums, all the courses have been performed. We're lucky at our school that we just have GCSE subjects, whereas some schools that have BTECs or other vocational courses. So I'm only going to focus on GCSE because that's what I know. The grading is now 9 to 1. As you can see, the boundaries have been set by the Department for Education. So grade 5 is a strong pass and grade 4 is a standard pass, but anything 4 and above is a pass. And that's what's recorded by schools in their attainment tables. There is also something that I'm going to explain in a moment called Attainment 8 and Progress 8 as well. But before I do, just to say that the grades 9 to 7 now collapse into what would have been the old grades A star to A. And what happens is students are awarded 8s and 7s, and then the top 20% are non-referenced to give the grade 9. So anyone that's scoring a 7 or a 8 are ranked by the government or Ofcom, and they are then given a 9. 9s are therefore quite difficult to predict, and certainly at my school, where students really want to achieve the high grades, and most are getting grade 7, 8, 9. Having a description for that top grade is impossible, and therefore we've really struggled with the whole idea of non-referencing. And so we've had to educate teachers, students and parents about what the grade 9 means, and I think we've got there now. So the next thing I wanted to explain was about Attainment 8 and Progress 8. And the best way to think about these is by thinking about different pots. So each student has 9 pots to fill, and English and Maths are double weighted pots. Then, as you can see, pots 4 to 9 can be filled in a number of different ways. So what happens is the top grades are taken, so the highest grade a student gets to fill those pots, and then they get a score. So simply the grades are added up, and that equals the Attainment 8 score. In terms of how it's reported, the schools average attainment rate is taken as something to record. And I should say as well, with English, it can be either language or literature that can be taken. But if you also have another, if you do both, it can go, if it's a top score, in part 7, 8, and 9 as well. To get the Progress 8 score, you work out the attainment rate of the student first and then divide by 10, and that gives a Progress 8 score. Anything above 1 implies that the student has done really well. So it means that they're maybe scoring or getting above their average. So anything above 1 is brilliant. Anything below 1 shows that really there's some work to do in terms of the target of the student, which comes from the Fish Family Trust and what they eventually get. In our school, for example, we've had quite consistent Progress 8 scores. So as a school, we scored in the first year, so in 2009, we got 1.21 as our Progress 8 score for the school, and then in 2000 and the next year, I think 2019, we got 1.19 as well. So to sort of help explain this a bit better than I can do already, we're going to have a look at some GCSE data. So that's task C, so you need to pause me again and complete that. So you're looking for overall patterns that you can see from the data, and then what you might do about it. So those tasks are for you to complete now. So in order to do that, I've given you computer science to have a look at. So that's task D. And you're going to have a look at the data that's collected and also the apps for that particular group of students. So please pause me now and complete task D.
So this year, as you know, was a very unusual, extraordinary year. And early in 2021, there were specific dates for different countries. Scotland were told before, Wales were told before, England were told. But around that time in early 2021, we were told there wouldn't be formal exams and that we would have the freedom to decide our internal exams process, and then we would use these internal exams grades in order to come up with the CAGs, which are the Centre Assessed Grades. The choices that schools decided to make on this were very, very varied. Some schools decided to just use exams that students had already sat or would have finished sitting by about March time. Others decided to add more and more mock exams or tests that then built up to give the teachers a bigger picture of where the students were. So those decisions were left up to schools. The examples did provide us with some questions that we could use. Quite unhelpfully, they also shared those questions with students online, or there was talk of this, or they got leaked. But either way, the questions were out there. The mark schemes were much harder to find. And obviously, you know, teachers had to either make up some questions of their own, which a lot of teachers opted to do. They used a lot of past paper questions. Some teachers, some schools decided to go with questions from different exam boards so that they could keep it as wide as possible, so that they didn't get as many students having seen the questions beforehand. And you know, if some schools had contexts where students were very likely to be proactive in finding those tests and finding past papers and finding mark schemes and things like that, and just doing as many of them as they could, then they would also do multiple test papers. So a lot of variation in how schools chose to do this. As a result, they collected their data. At this point in the year, so we're now, at the time that we've recorded this, we're just at the end of May, all teachers will have marked, collated the data from the papers that they marked, moderated them in department. The moderation process was particularly grueling this year. For example, here in my school, we sat the papers. We then all had a set of 6-7 papers that we all marked. Everyone marked the exact same papers. We then put all our data into a database for every single question, what we awarded each question, and then we got together as a department and we discussed, debated, reanalyzed the mark scheme, you know, made some adjustments what we felt we needed to, so that we all left to mark our full set of papers with as much information as we could have about the mark scheme and how, you know, what we should be awarding marks for and what we shouldn't. We then, partway through our marking process, met again in teams. So teachers paired up, met again, swapped some, and then saw, do we agree? Do we not agree? Would I have awarded this or not? Had those conversations again, and then gone back and marked the rest of our papers. And potentially, if there was something that we were awarding that we shouldn't have, or vice versa, we'd then go back over the papers we'd already marked and start again. So it was an extremely tough process. It was very hard to do alongside teaching our other classes. And we had multiple papers to do it with. You know, we also had year 11 and 13s going through this process at the same time. That's the moderation process. Different schools may have done that differently. For example, if you're in a subject where there needs to be quite a lot of debate or discussion about whether or not they hit certain levels, like if there's like leveling instead of just, am I awarding this mark or not? Then in that situation, there might have been more of a group discussion, like for example, in like if a student is doing like an oral exam in MFL, as an example, or if they're writing essays in history, that kind of stuff. Either way, the data should now be collected and moderated, and heads of department are deciding on appropriate grade boundaries, again, because they were given certain levels from Ofqual, the exam boards, about where students should fall if they're awarded a 9, if they're awarded an A at A level, etc. The heads of department also needed to take into account the traditional ratios of level 8, 9, 7s, ABCs that they had in their school context. You know, it wouldn't be normal for them to suddenly be awarding 40% A stars at A level if traditionally they're getting 5% A stars at A level in their context. So they have to follow similar percentages and ratios to what they normally would achieve. The heads of department will then discuss these grades with SLT, and also there might be some students that might need to be discussed a little bit further, like for example students that may have had extenuating circumstances that meant they couldn't sit exams, or they couldn't sit all the exams, or they were having a particular tough time in year 10, but then, you know, were attending perfectly and achieving really well in year 11. So do we weight the year 10 exams the same for that student as other? So there might be certain things like that that people need to take into account. The HODs will sit down, discuss that with the class teacher, take it to SLT. SLT will use that data to assign particular student grades and agree that the grades that have been awarded. So that is the process that has happened this year in a nutshell. Obviously, there's been differences from, you know, within different schools, and there might have been more or less checkpoints that needed to take place. But overall, that's the sort of thing that we've been doing in schools this year. Like I said, it's been a crazy ride, and it has been very unusual for all of us, but that's where we were, and we're hoping that we never have to do it again. The last thing that I wanted to add here about, another measure that's been put in place is that every teacher had to complete some anti-bias training, and they had to adhere to those rules, the rules that sort of outline objectivity and how to prevent bias as much as possible. This is we're marking kids that we know. So how do we, whereas traditionally it would be an examiner might have in one part of the country would have exams from a whole different part of the country that they're marking. So how can what sort of things can we put into place to not have that influence our marks? So yeah, that's been done by everyone. And most schools, one of the things that they did there was they just used, instead of names on the front, they just used candidate numbers. And they also didn't give teachers their own kids' papers. So that was one of the most basic things that we could have done. But there were other things as well that we had to take into account when we were marking. So that's a summary of our current context. Hopefully that's not something that you ever have to go through again, but that's where we are this year. So thank you so much. That concludes our presentation. We would really appreciate it if you could follow the link that is up here, but also will be sent to you, and just give us a little bit of feedback so that we can adapt it for next time. Thank you very much. And that's us finished.